Welcome to week 4. I'll start with an apology that the quiz is telling everybody you got the answers wrong, which doesn't make any sense. I'll take another look at it, but I think that's the only format that allows me to get so complex and ask you for survey items and so forth. We'll see. And if that's the case, I'll just have to put a caveat up front saying it's going to tell you you're wrong, don't believe it. So without further ado, let's review what we have tonight. Chapters 6 and 7, I wanted to do a brief version of Chapter 7, so it will be sort of brief. I just didn't prepare slides of the same type in Chapter 6, so we got to get through that pretty fast because we want to get to beyond the textbook and then team project, process definition, and see how all that goes. So now without further ado, let's move into Chapter 6 and talk about levels of analysis. Here we go, levels of analysis in organization change. And what's levels of analysis? Well, individual, group, organization, and you can often stick another level in there someplace. But those are your basic levels. There is nothing between individual and group, by the way. And group and team are the same level of analysis, so that doesn't change anything. But between group or team and the organization, sometimes there's an intermediate level, like a division. And we have to recognize those, even though that level of analysis may be a bit hard to define sometimes. Is it a big group? Is it a group of groups? What is it exactly? A division is an organization, by the way, but there are organizations that are made out of more than one division. So you can say, well, they have this legal purview over more than one organization, construed as a single organization. Which one is it? Well, in terms of pure science, systems theory, it is not going to be the same answer as in terms of, well, let's say, the state's creation of legal entities. Anyway, individual level change is basically going to be HR. And it's some kind of training usually, but there's also selection, there's recruitment, there's placement. Anything you do at the individual level of analysis, if you're changing something, it's going to be individual level change. It also includes a job design, by the way. Job design itself, of course, is an individual level change. You could argue, yeah, but when we're creating teams, all right, that'd be team level change. Anyway, the HR focus is what dominates the individual level of change. So selection, recruitment, replacement, job structures, team versus individual, selection for team assignments. That's if you're being selected for a team assignment, the individual level assessment is going to have something in there like, do you work well with teams, right? So even though you may be selecting someone for a team assignment, that doesn't make that team level of analysis or group level of analysis. Then, of course, you have coaching and counseling. There's coaching for skills, performance, development. There's mentorship. Executive coaching is a high-status version of managerial coaching, of course. And all of those occur at the individual level of analysis, including executive coaching. It sounds like if you're dealing with the top leadership or people way high up in the organization, it must be somehow organizational. But it's just you're working with one person still, so we still call that individual level change, even if the effect that we intend is something that's going to pervade the organization. All right, here is the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. This is famous. It's discussed in the text, so we want to go ahead and review it, just make sure we all know what it is. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. It's so well known. It's in pop psychology all over the place. But this is supposed to give us an idea of what happens when you change things in an organization, what happens at the individual level. Something sort of similar. You can argue that it isn't exactly the same. I mean, when Kubler-Ross came up with this idea, it's like, okay, it becomes universal. It's not necessarily 100% psychologically logical all the way through, but it's enough. We can work with it. So when people start acting a little funny because of some kind of change going on, we can trust that at some point they're going to come out of the other side, and meanwhile they're going to yell at us, and they're going to act weird. So I think that kind of takes care of itself. There are other theories, though, in terms of psychology. What is it with people? Why do they feel bad? Why do they feel frustrated when the organization changes? Well, we have a few better theories than Kubler-Ross, even though the Kubler-Ross cycle is famous. We have in Levinson's book, Psychological Man, that he wrote a long time ago, 5 stages of grief. We have them reconstrued a little bit. So change is the experience of loss, whether or causes the experience of loss, whether embraced or resisted. So what he's trying to say is what you're used to is in your mind what you have. As soon as they change something big time, it's a big change. Like you just lost something, so you need something to kind of carry you through it. Is what Levinson's trying to say. So we've lost familiar routines. The more psychologically important the thing that you've lost, the more resistance there's likely to be: yelling, screaming, arguing, fighting, disbelieving. And all loss necessitates some kind of mourning. You want to ritualize the loss. You want to make a celebration of it, or a commemoration of it, or get together and have people put their heads together and say how they feel. Something. You're just trying to create a ritual. Ritual, for human beings, ritual makes life make sense. Well, we love ritual. There's ritual all over the place. There's a formal ritual, the holidays. There's institutional ritual like marriages and things. But you want to be able to go through some kind of rehearsed or structured experience that only exists for the sake of commemorating the change, in this case commemorating a loss of some kind. And so Levinson writes in his book, says most organizational change flounders, should be founders actually, but people get that confused a lot, because the experience of loss is not taken into account. When the threats of loss are so severe as to increase people's sense of helplessness, their ability to master themselves and their environments decreases. To undertake successful organizational change, an executive must anticipate and provide means of working through that loss. What we're going to see, by the way, is when there's a big change, it's more psychologically important, more resistance. Okay. The bigger the change, more or less, the more upset the individual is going to be. We're going to find pretty soon that one thing, this is Burke's experience, in fact, one thing that people need absolutely when there's a big change going on is they need to know what big thing is going to stay the same. And that big thing needs to be big enough. It needs to be identifiable enough as the mainstay of their experience so that the change becomes tolerable. Let's say there's big change going on in one place, no change going on in another, but if all eyes are on where the change is occurring, they can lose sight of the fact that, well, yeah, but you got this comfort zone still. It's still here. Don't worry about it. This is when Carl Weick talks about sense making. Wow. That's his big thing, of course. He's like, talk about what stays the same. Talk about why that's important. Enhance it a bit. Our strategy will remain the same. Our customer base will remain the same. Our philosophy will remain the same. Make sure that it's something closely connected with your employee's experience. That's going to overcome a lot of this psychological effect. Here's Brahm's theory. Your feeling of freedom is in jeopardy. So what are you losing if you go from Levinson and say, well, you're losing freedom. The feeling of freedom is in jeopardy. The impulse is to regain the feeling of freedom. You're losing your sense of freedom. You can't be locked behind this cage of impediment. So I'm going to do something to make myself free. I'm going to try to break out of the cage, I guess. Spurred by a perception of lack of choice, being forced rather than persuaded to change. I have to change, and nobody asked me. It's just being done to me. Let me touch on something. There's a parallel in the team structure. If you take on a role, it's like, how about you have this role? Okay, fine. And you're like, there's a role. Just look how it's written. I'll take it. I don't know. You didn't accept it. You didn't accept it consciously. You just like sort of, somebody threw it at you and you took hold of it. Okay. There's a big difference between saying, okay, now leave me a second, folks. I'm gonna read through this role description you've given me, and I don't like that word there. Let me change it to this one. And yeah, my perspective would be, if I'm doing, I'd add this and I would change that. So I'm taking possession of it by saying, I'm not just going to be expected to catch some role the way somebody else wrote it that's kind of alien to me and then pretend to get used to it. I'm going to take ownership of it, and that's going to look like my sitting down and rewriting the thing. It's going to say fundamentally the same thing as the original, but in my own words and with my own perspective and some of my own ideas stuck in there. Now it's mine. I have to take ownership of it. The individual has to believe, look, I wrote that. That's me. That's me. I thought about it and everything. The difference between that and just accepting a role that's given to you is like the difference between being an active part of the organization and just hoping the whole thing just goes away. It's an enormous psychological difference. And Braham is touching on it with this sense of freedom versus lack of freedom, choice versus lack of choice. So being forced rather than persuaded to change, or being forced to change rather than being asked, hey, do you want to join us with this change thing? And you say, let me think about it for a bit. Okay, how about if I do this? It makes a big difference. Reaction is often overwhelming, cognitively distorted when change is happening. There's a cognition. When it's cognitively distorting, there is this sense, and this is, I've seen this in various places. If you are under a condition of cognitive distortion, you're getting confused, you're like it feels uneasy here on some level, you don't just push it away, cram it away from it. Focus on something that's staying stable. Most important thing, if there's something big that's staying stable, focus on that thing while there's other things going on. Make that stable datum make sense, and then make the change make sense with respect to the stable datum, as opposed to allowing your cognitive distortion to get the better of you. Acceptance of change is proportional to the perception of choice in the matter. See how that feeds into, how did I take my role? Did I just grab it because somebody threw it at me, or did I consciously make a decision to rewrite it in my own terms? And then I would say, how's this, guys? You think this is good? And if someone says, well, I think you're missing that one part of it, I think it's, oh, okay. There's a little discussion goes on. We call that role negotiation. But in the end, you've written your own role. A suppression of rational thought occurs. You lose your ability to reason when your freedom of choice has been taken away and you feel like you're just being pushed around. So here's Braham's model, just kind of written out in a pictorial method. The importance of freedom and the threat rate over freedom both play on the situational reaction. And in that, however you happen to be reacting, that creates psychological effects, cognitive and adjudicative changes, as well as behavioral effects, opposition and aggression. The behavioral effects are fundamentally attitudinal in nature. Opposition is an attitude. Aggression, a little anger coming out of the attitude. So we often refer to them as behavioral, but the fact is that what happens in the mind is something at an attitudinal level. Okay, then here we have group level change. So we have team building as a type of group level change. What are you trying to do? Well, you have a group, you have a team, trying to make it work better. That's what team building is. Team building doesn't really mean creating a team piece by piece. Let's push this person over here and that person over there. That's not really team building. You begin with a team. It's already there. But you're just going to work with them as a team, all together in the same room while you're doing this intervention. And you want them to work better together. So either goal clarity or interpersonal problems could be what you're focused on. Teams need clarity on team goals, roles, procedure, of course. Team cohesion, that's a thing. It's a double-edged sword. Team cohesion is not just inherently a good thing. That's a very cohesive team. All right, well, they're going to hang together very well. Now, team cohesion you can interpret on an attitudinal basis by saying they like each other a lot. They hang together. It's a sturdy little group there. So their attitudes with respect to one another are such that they want to stay together, which is good. But now imagine a team that's very, very close-knit, but they're screwing around with some of the rules of the workplace. They're cheating on something. Well, they're all doing it. They're close-knit. You try to change them, and you have a lot of resistance to that. That used to happen in certain union settings, where you have the union folks. They all agree they're going to work at half the normal pace, or some kind of less than full productivity, and they don't want anybody among them feeling like, well, I can work faster than this. There's this thing called binging, I think they called it. So the individual who's working a little too hard, some of the other team members, group members, unit members, would every now and then just kind of punch you in the shoulder. Like, well, what's going on? And just walk away, not telling you what's going on. But that's supposed to be a physical manifestation of their opposition to the fact that you are not being a viable part of the collective. So team cohesion can be a double-edged sword. When it's a highly cohesive team and productivity is high and they're all like, we are the best, everything's great, well, then it's great, because you can say, hey folks, the mission has changed, it's going to be this now. They're like, we're ready to go. Now they're together being productive as opposed to being together resisting. So cohesion by itself is neither good nor bad, but it will tell you that the whole team, whatever happens with the whole team, they're together. Team cohesion can inhibit turnover right? If there's a very cohesive team, they may not welcome new members coming in. They may not welcome replacements. Too much team spirit can lead to perhaps insularity and a disconnect from the organization as a whole. Okay, then we have this idea of self-directed work teams. See, a lot of times a team isn't really a team. It's called a team. It's a group of people, or it's a bunch of people in a room, and they call themselves a team, or somebody calls them a team. But they're actually they're a group of some kind, and maybe there's a lot of interplay. I do this part of a project, I hand it off to that guy. He does this, and maybe there's a little bit of an operation going on in there. So there is some camaraderie, but it may not be a true team. True team is such that every individual is fully a part of discussions and the sharing of energy. The self-directed work team is essentially that. So how is that then different from, let's say, an articulated group of people who pass partial work off to each other as they're finishing it, do that sort of thing? Well, now we have this idea that groups exist in more than one basic form. One, there's a group structure that looks like a basketball team. There's a whole bunch of vibrant interaction, and that's what a team really is when you think of it in the right way. Self-directed work team. It's a basketball team. Then there's a baseball team. It's a group of people with the articulated movement of something internally. They're kind of carrying out a bit of a mechanistic production process of some kind. And then there's the bowling team. And that's everybody in the group is doing something. They're all working in parallel, but they're not handing anything off to each other. They're just like a typing pool, for example. Okay, I get my work, I'm typing. Somebody else, that person's next to me. And that's what happens. So when everybody is doing the same thing, we call that the bowling team structure. Well, Hackman is the preeminent mind in terms of how to create a team. He's also one of the collaborators in the model of core job characteristics, so he comes up there as well. Core job characteristics, that's that skill, variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. Every task should have some element of each of these, and you can fiddle with these properties of the task, and then that'll influence the motivation of the individual to be able to absorb the task and really get into it, or just feel like it's just a drudgery. So Hackman's criteria, that's these here, applied to self-managed work teams. So he says, here are your criteria. First, it has to be a real team. It really actually has to be a team. It can't be like, well, we call you a team, but we on the outside, we your superiors, we're always telling you what to do. Well, if outsiders are constantly telling you what to do as a team, and you are not allowed to think of solutions to your own problems as a team on your own, autonomously, then you're not a team, you're a fake team. So he said, well, you have to be a real team. Stable, clearly defined boundaries, shared identity. There needs to be a compelling direction, of course. That's a part of the structure of the team. Clear, challenging, and meaningful goals. That's the idea that we know what our purpose is. We know what we're trying to achieve. So it's structure. Remember, there are 4 aspects of structure in a team. They're not all going to be quite here, one by one, but notice enabling structure here focuses on roles, norms, and you know about the roles and norms. And then he adds balanced skills. The idea being that everybody on a team should be about the same ability to contribute something, as opposed to somebody being such a newbie that says, I don't know what's going on here. I can't do what you guys do. So you say, well, then you're on trash duty. You just take out the trash. You don't want that kind of team member on a team. You want everybody able to contribute as much as anybody else, and willing to at the same time. But you notice he has roles and norms right there in the enabling structure. So you throw compelling direction in with enabling structure, and all that's left is this idea of what's your operating objective. Now, I know Hackman doesn't include operating objective or strategy. And you say, why is that? Well, think about how you had to work through this question yourself. How do you define an operating objective unless you're a company and you can pick a core business strategy? See, it's hard to do that. And he knows that, so he left that part out. Anyway, supportive context, access to resources, information, and rewards. You got it. So you have to be connected somehow in order to pull this stuff in. And then expert coaching, which is unusual aspect of Hackman's criteria. Hardly anybody ever says that. You have to have expert coaching. Say, what do you mean? We're a team. It's just a bunch of people working together, right? No. There's a lot about teams. It's a socio-psychological structure that you have to study. It doesn't take care of itself. It is common for people to believe that to be a team, you just get to sit down together and you just all agree. All right, let's all do it. It's cool. But you go through these phases of team evolution. And in terms of social psychology, you don't form a single identity by working together as you're working together just because you want to. That has to be a product of the evolution of the team. It's an emergent property of the team. All right, that's Hackman's criteria. Then we get organization level change. That's all the big strategic stuff. But here we have this first, second, and third order change. First and second order are correct. Third order is debatable. But as you'll come to know in any kind of, whether it's popular business press or formal theories, as soon as you number things, somebody's going to come up with the next number. So first order and second order change, oh yeah, everybody knows about those. First order change is essentially evolutionary, incremental, the management domain. Second order change is revolutionary, disruptive, the leadership domain. Now that's enough. You don't need to go beyond that. Of course, someone says, well, there's number one, number two. What would number three be? How about involvement of multiple factors toward a goal? So what on earth does that mean? Well, it just sounds neat. So I would not put a lot of stock in third order change, but you can make a bit of an argument that interorganizational networks or something to this effect. That's okay. But you know it exists. Somebody said it, but it's not necessarily something you want to quote. And then we get, of course, a reminder of Kurt Levine's three-phase change model. Every now and then we'll mention this thing, and then we'll mention it again. So phase one, he uses in his 1947 paper, he mentions it twice, right? So but once he says unfreeze, move, and freeze. The next time he says unfreeze, change, and freeze. So you could do either one, I suppose. But phase one is unfreeze. What he's doing is he's picturing, if it's applied to an organization or a group of people, because he often will, in his discussions, apply it also to sociological factors like crime and that sort of thing. So it's just groups of people out there who aren't necessarily working together. But applied to an organization, unfreeze. The system is frozen in motion. The system constantly recreates itself. He understands this. Even in a sociological context, the interplay of various factors will create essentially an equilibrium of some kind. Like the crime rate is at this level. Financial stuff, the economy is growing at this level. And it tends to persist for a bit, and it kind of can be rocky sometimes. But there are many factors pushing up and down on those metrics. So he says, well, you have to unfreeze, first of all. In an organization, you need to create a sense of urgency. To unfreeze, essentially, to him means, all right, everybody stop and wake up. Do you know what we've been doing all this time? Oh, no, I just thought of it. You just brought it up. Well, we've been in an organization all this time. Didn't you know? Oh, I wasn't even thinking about it. It's kind of like that. It's sort of like you stop thinking about it. It becomes habit. So you stop and wake up, and now you're doing kind of a metacognitive exercise. We're saying, here's what we've been doing all this time. Here's where we are. It's kind of like awakening of some kind. So the system is frozen in motion. You need to interrupt the cycles. Phase two is to move. That's the implementation phase, of course. New rules, procedures, training, priorities, structure, the whole works. Phase three then is to freeze. And of course, that's the thing that most of the time we don't do well enough. Keep the change from drifting back to the status quo ante. This is why we study systems theory, complexity theory. We want to get really used to this scientific idea that the system has a way of warding off any kind of partial change. The system tends to, it's self-reproducing, it's self-perpetuating to a great extent. But that aspect of it, the self-perpetuating nature, means that if you change one part of it, well, you've messed up the whole self-perpetuating whole of the thing. And so all the rest is going to be conspiring to turn that thing back. And people don't know why they tend to slip back. They think it's, well, I'm just a lazy person or something. But that's not the case at all. In terms of social psychology, think about it. you can be thinking one day, I think I'll do this next in my life. But now if you're part of a group and the thing that you plan to do next month or next year has anything to do with all of the expectations being sent to you constantly by the group, there's an enormous compulsion to change in some way, or to, if you're going to change at all, to do something in some way that corresponds to those expectations, as opposed to you being alone. It's different. So that freeze is very important. Speaking of freezing, the air conditioner seems to be off in here, and it's getting very cold. Just so you know, if you see ice crystals, that will be why. But that essentially is it for our most important aspects of Chapter 6. I think we'll take a little break and then we'll move into Chapter 7. Moving into Chapter 7 then, so-called research on change, research and theory on organization change. This provides a few different models, and that alpha, beta, gamma thing is going to pop up here as well. We're going to touch on alpha, beta, gamma, and first order, second order later on when we get to the beyond the text, so we don't have to dig into it too much. So reviews of the research. Early reviews, we had Friedlander and Brown trying to figure out essentially what do we know about organization development and change? What do we know so far? And so, you'd have these big studies that amass all kinds of reflections on things. The literature in organization development and change can be confusing. There's so many ideas out there, so many wire diagrams, all sorts of things. So the targeted interventions they found, there are two broad categories in the research. You'll find interventions focusing on people, something about people, communication, decision-making, problem-solving, trying to get that better. Then there would be those studies that focus on technology. That's how they describe it. Task methods, job design, organization design. In other words, it parallels the two dimensions, the two axes of leadership. You have a person-oriented and a task-oriented kind of leadership. The technology here, what does technology mean? It means applied knowledge. It means doing the stuff. It means the task. Okay. So these two categories of interventions in the research happen to parallel perfectly the two axes of our universal leadership model. Two outcomes evidenced in the research, also fell in line exactly the same way. Human fulfillment, in other words, the person side, and task accomplishment. All right, so here we have a little bit of a model. It looks a little funny, but yeah, see people, technology, human processual approach, organizational processes, organizational structures. They're trying to make it all nice and neat. Focusing on the processes, they say, the processes have to do with the people. So, well, that's interesting. So, processes then. Could we think of processes as sequences of activities that have a cyclical character? You know, the fact is that the process model of the open system, which is in contradistinction to the cybernetic structure, process model is what the open system really is. The cybernetic structure is kind of an outgrowth. So that mechanical looking thing is just an add-on, as it were. Where the process model tells you what's really going on. Everything's cyclical, though. It's all these little bitty, big, long, little bitty cycles of events. So, well, who carries the cycles of events? Well, the generic argument here from Friedlander and Brown is that, well, the people do. You could, instead of saying people, say behaviors, because it is, in some sense, behaviors that carry all the movement and all the stuff that moves around an organization. So with technology, the applied knowledge aspect, the task, they decided, well, organizational structures. Notice human processual approach and technostructural approach end up being the terms that come out of this observation of theirs. And we use these terms a lot to this day. Technostructural approach to any kind of organization change is, you know, new job design, moving things around, reorienting everything. It's always physical in nature. Or it could be descriptive in terms of job design, but otherwise it's like you're doing something technical. So technostructural is our common term for that. Human processual has to do with getting the people to communicate better, you're influencing their attitudes and that sort of thing. And then you have this human fulfillment, task accomplishment. So that's a common trait of all organization change. That's what they're saying. They're saying this is what organization change does. Focus on these things and creates those things. That's most of what you see out there. There are 4 problems of OD research. There were limitations of traditional science. Traditional science can overlook interconnectedness. So traditional science is hard to apply to organization development and change. You know, it's easier to apply traditional scientific methods to the little subunits of organizations, people's attitudes, leadership. I don't mean leadership in the big sense. I mean how to be a better leader kind of thing. You know, how to, you know, we have those 2 axes. That's one way to do it. But the whole organization is a really big, complex system. Literally, it's a really big, complex system. You can't take that and say, all right, well, we're going to, you know, use simple assumptions to fiddle with it. You can do that in other contexts that are more physical science oriented, even though there's a lot of complexity out there. Geology will tell you some stuff. Hydrology will tell you some stuff. Atmospheric physics will tell you some stuff. And each one of these areas of science has, there's something very elemental in there someplace. And you get the admixture, but it's all amenable to a fairly simple set of assumptions, even though it can get complex because you got lots of these little assumptions playing around. Organizations, being self-organizing systems, are not amenable to that kind of simplification. And what I mean by simplification, traditional science, the analytical type of science that we grow up with, focuses on trying to distill from, let's say, the multifaceted natural environment, simple premises that you can use. The same thing for classical psychology, right? Simple premises. Simple, like this one little factor, this does stuff. But there's so much interaction in an organization that it makes it problematic. That's why we say that traditional science can overlook interconnectedness. The snapshot research, so the types of research that we do, what do, we remember, surveys are a big deal. We get contracts with a whole bunch of organizations, you know, they agree, okay, this is cool, we'll work with you. And you say, okay, here comes our big old giant survey, and you give it to everybody in all these organizations. Then it comes back, and then you work with all the statistical stuff. But when you do a survey of everybody in an organization, you're getting a snapshot of the organization. It's all in the sense of survey data, but we call that a snapshot. You don't know what caused what. You just see everything happening right now. And that's the limitation there. That's why we have to take these more difficult longitudinal studies where we measure a bunch of stuff now, then 6 months later we measure some stuff again, and 6 months after that measure some stuff again. And it takes a lot more effort to do that, but that's the only way you can figure out if something is causing something else over time. So snapshot research always raises this threat. You're not sure what caused what. Causality, you confuse correlation with causality, and you get causality backwards sometimes. So snapshot research is, when we say in part, it's hard to confirm the permanence of any change initiative. You made a big change, you took a snapshot, everything's cool, but did the change hold? What causes whether the change holds or not? Well, unless you come back, you can't really tell. So quantitative methods are limited, outcomes have multiple causes, and statistical methods make results hard to support in practice, in the sense of you don't know what caused what a lot of times, and there's so much complexity. So adopting action research, as we mentioned before, also known as action science, moves us away from positivistic assumptions. Positivism is essentially scientific method, pretty much what it is. Positivism is this philosophy in scientific methods that says what's out there is objectively real, and that's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out what's out there, outside of ourselves. It exists whether we like it or not, right? So that's positivism. And so you move away from positivistic assumptions. Instead of saying, well, the organization is what it is, yeah, but everybody's interacting with everybody. It's really tough to, when we talk about the social constructivism, the organization is also a social construction. Everybody in it is behaving in the organization in ways that make the organization work, and they're behaving that way under the assumption that it's all true. See, but it is true. Yeah, but if they weren't interacting like that, it wouldn't be true, would it? Well, why are they interacting like that? Well, because they believe it's true. You say, it's like, if you believe your group, your team is real, then you'll say, oh, my team's going to meet in an hour, I got to be there. Why do you have to be there? Because it's real and you made a schedule. What if you believed it was an illusion? Well, you'd be like, well, it's just a team. I mean, a lot of people do that, actually. They think that, well, it's just a team. Teams, it's not really like, the professor tells you to do something, yeah, I'll do it, but team? No, that's just as important. In fact, in this course, you could practically argue it's more important. The most important place to be when your team meets is with the team. But you have to treat the team as a real thing in order for that to work. If everybody in the team just thinks, well, we're just kind of playing along here, then the team won't act like a team. And so we have move away from positivistic assumptions toward user involvement, self-correction, time to learn, developing unique theories about the organization that is in need of change. Action research fundamentally means we study the organization, now we're going to fiddle with it, and we're going to study it again. So positivistic research, strictly speaking, would be we study the organization and we just left and wrote it all up and said, look what we discovered. Growing research on organization change. There's a growth of action research, of course, and that's become a normal thing. There are whole textbooks that are all just action research. They may not even say it quite like that, but they are. And so we have issues in here. Let's kind of gloss over some of this, but the researchers have to get involved in the organization. So they're a part of it, but they can't be a part of it. They're a part of it, but they're not a part of it. And a lot of times what you'll get in really deep, the deeper kinds of action research, we have phenomenological studies. It's not strictly action research because very, very often it just means the individuals embedded in the environment, in the organization, and learning and soaking in a lot of stuff, but trying not to influence the environment. So it's positivistic in that sense, but it's phenomenological, meaning that you're taking the whole thing as enormously complex and you're going to try to create a narrative that explains some aspect of it. It's quite deep. It takes a long time to do that stuff. You can be there for a year or more, embedded in an organization, just constantly doing interviews and observations of meetings and things. There's issues of clarity about the research objective, evaluated versus scientific purpose. So how do you study something as an objective reality while at the same time you're trying to change it? It becomes really complicated. And then selecting the appropriate dependent variables and what are you looking for in terms of outcomes. I would say something more basic creates problems in the research in organization development change. And what is that? You have to study whole organizations. When you study individuals, you want to find out individual attitudes or something, you can get a whole bunch of individuals, have them all take your surveys and analyze it all at the individual level of analysis. You have a lot of data. You have a lot of data points. But organizations, to get 1,000 data points at something that occurs at the organization level of analysis, you need 1,000 organizations participating. That's a lot. We don't normally get that far. So we'll often have studies where they're like that we got a dozen organizations, and we're really lucky we got 50 organizations. But you can just never get very far with your complicated studies and all these surveys and stuff at that level of analysis. So it ends up causing a lot of outcomes that are not strong enough to show up in the statistics. So you're not sure whether to trust the outcomes or not, because you really need more data points. So the number of data points is actually the biggest drawback of organization development research. That's why all the other kinds of research in organizational behavior, the domain of organizational behavior, is so much easier than organization development. Here we have a little magnitude of change. So basically, this is kind of a neat little model, I suppose, but alpha change is construed as the difference along a stable dimension of reality. You're like, well, we just increased we just changed the specifications on some process. Used to be, got to be within these parameters. Now it's going to be like, well, these parameters, a little tighter or something. You made an alpha change. Okay, somebody decided to call it an alpha change one day. Then what's the beta change? Okay, now you are recalibrating the intervals along a stable reality dimension. So you're changing the metric and stuff, right? Then gamma change, reconceptualization. But essentially what you have is alpha and beta is kind of two levels of the same thing. You're just getting a little nitpicky with this. Notice though this alpha, beta, gamma change is construable as a metric-based presentation of types of change, whereas the other one, first order, second order, is not metric-based. It is instead, more or less paradigm-based or something. It's a different idea. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's see, let's do some terminology. We have this idea of antecedents. Any kind of studying, there's antecedents. We say antecedents instead of causes because we're looking for factors that can exist, that have to exist prior to something happening. They may be causes or they may just be conditions. We're not sure. But saying antecedents is a nicer term. So if we say, okay, the organization, let's say we're studying resistance to change. Hey, resistance to change. That's a good one because you can study at the individual level of analysis. So you can get a lot of data points. Makes it easy. So what causes resistance to change? Okay, well, now you're at like, okay, well, we had a few organizations doing this. We had a few others at the same company doing that. We did a field experiment. So I said, over here, we're going to train everybody. We're going to have a big old, hey, we're going to change. It's going to be like this. Are you ready? You know. And over here, we're going to have a get together where we do something that's unrelated to the change thing. So that you always have, they're both going through something sort of similar, but one of them is about to change, and the other one's not. And then the change happens and all this. They put in the new systems. Again, a bunch of divisions of the same company, or a bunch of units of the same company. And then we measure these guys' resistance to change compared to those guys' resistance to change. And we say, well, if there's a difference, then it must have something to do with the fact that we forewarned all these guys and we didn't forewarn these guys. So we draw our conclusions. So that would be the antecedents, an antecedent condition where they forewarned, and you call it some technical thing. And then there's the determining cause and effect, of course. I mentioned that. When you do snapshot studies, you can't always tell. And notice, here's the word consequences, antecedents and consequences. I saw in one study the word consequent with a T as a noun, antecedents and consequence, as though it's a parallel terminology. But we do that sometimes in academia. I thought it was kind of a neat term. But consequences, obviously, they're outcomes, just outcomes. Consequences sound bad, so no, we just mean the effects, that's all. Sometimes we want to use the word consequences to be more generic. Okay, so we have single unit studies. What's that? We went to one organization. We're trying to study organization development change, but we only go to one organization. Well, what on earth can you do with that? Well, you can find out what they did and what happened there. And you can say, yeah, it's sort of similar to this other study that I read. Interesting. But it's limited. So the single unit studies, usually come in the form of a case study of some kind. And what we want is a lot of rich description in a case study. Because what else can you get, right? Do you measure everybody and it's all up? I mean, you in one organization change intervention, unless it's multiple units and you have the opportunity to test some kind of theory, it's just one big organization. So you are measuring, essentially, if you're measuring anything, let's say you're using scales, attitude or something, you're seeing, let's say, attitudes change in the wake of a change intervention, but you have nothing to compare it to because it's a single unit study, it's only one. Predicting recipient reactions to change, we have this idea of a trust condition. I think that's important. Recipients must trust leaders in change processes. There must be a sense of we're all in this together, otherwise you get the resistance kind of thing. When you're being treated to unknowns, like trust us, it's going to be okay, and you're like, yeah, but it feels really wrong, I don't know. The trust has to be. The trust can overcome that. I don't know where we're going, but I trust my leaders. Okay, I'm with it. But if you're like, oh, here they go again. Oh, last time, I heard bad stories, so if there's no trust, well, then they make all these changes, and you're not with it, and you're resistant. Involvement in decisions is a way to do it. The trust condition, by the way, is intimately associated with the exchange of information. So if you have, let's say, in one unit, there's, I don't know, a dozen people working that unit. They're all sort of the same level. Then you have the supervisor. Okay. If the supervisor regularly interacts with the people and everybody, they're kind of all friends, right? There's a strong trust condition. But what's happening? How'd that trust condition get there? Well, there's a lot of interplay. There's a lot of exchange of information. I don't mean they're like news stories. I mean there's, hi, how you doing? Oh, hey, we heard from the boss, we got to do this today. Oh, the organization's this, that. Oh, how's your dog? How's your family? It's everything. It's the soft, fuzzy stuff, and it's the task stuff. But there's a lot of conversation going on. So now, because that information exchange is nice and rich and vibrant, there's a lot of trust in there. But instead, the boss kind of hides in an office someplace, and every now and then comes out and just chastises somebody and escapes back to the office. Well, there's not that exchange. There may be exchange among the people within the unit horizontally, but not with the supervisor. So the trust condition is not there. Now, when the supervisor then wants to change something, oh, we're told we got to do this. They don't trust him because he hasn't been talking to him. Big impact. Yeah, the trust condition. Are you part of the in-group or not? We all have like a few friends that they show up. You imagine, picture this. You're at the office doing your thing. Somebody shows up and you're like, oh, it's you, yeah. There's a trust in certain people who might show up, whom you know. Somebody shows up and you don't know them, say, and what's this about? And now the question's all different, and you're worried about, I can't leave my workplace station too much. It's completely different when the trust condition's not there. It's just an outsider. The person is not part of your own personal in-group. Okay, in the research, we've also had leadership patterns being studied. You knew that from early on. Remember, one of the first things that they studied after the Hawthorne studies was leadership stuff. They came up with the 2 axes. And so we have leadership patterns, so this idea of distributed leadership. Distributed leadership would be participating, in a sense. It would be, you're all together, your peers, maybe you're all in leadership positions and maybe you're staff positions, but you work together closely like a team or a committee or something. And so there is no vertical hierarchy so much within that subset of the organization. So you're not getting up there with your peers and just telling them what to do. You're talking to them and you're reasoning with them. And so you're distributing leadership in this sense. You're open to their ideas, and very often you may say, when Joe says, hey, how about if we do this? I think that could work because I worked for a place before and it worked really well, and I can look into that. So, could you look into that? Okay, well then he looks into it. So now Joe is going off and doing a little research and digging up and talking to somebody, coming back. He's taking on responsibility. What would otherwise be just thrown at the leader. There are phraseology you get in these kind of flat structures, team structures. Can you take charge of that, or can you look into that, or you want to put the monkey on somebody else's back, and your team members they wander off with monkeys on their backs, no problem. They'll come back and solve issues later. So distributed leadership is what that looks like. Let's see. Yeah, we know all the other leadership stuff. Let's see. Leadership patterns, lack of leader impact, leader effectiveness. Yeah, that's a little not quite important. Issues and tentative conclusions. 4 weaknesses in leadership of change that they found in the literature. Overemphasis on the individual leader role, which is very interesting. Now remember, you're studying individual leaders and you want them individually to be better leaders, as opposed to thinking of a completely different model where it's the whole structure that you got to be looking at. I have the example here of University of Alabama football team. All right, so we had Nick Saban there for a while, being like the winningest coach of ever and all that stuff. And both broke Bear Bryant's record. That's great. Okay, so what is the secret to University of Alabama football? It was a great coach, you'd say. So, well, the great coach first is attracted to that place, says, hey, University of Alabama, oh my gosh, that's like the best place ever to be a coach. I'm going to go there. So why is it? Not just because well, you show up as this great coach. You've already got your creds elsewhere. You're clearly a winning kind of coach, and there are winning coaches out there. There are coaches out there that are really good at what they do. You give them a bad football team, and they'll still win more than their predecessor did, but not going to be nearly as good as if you give them a good football team. So the football team itself, those people selected and trained that you're joining, that makes a big difference. Then, of course, there needs to be all the institutional support. I'm looking for better players. I'm looking for players who can do this and that and that and this. I want you to scout around and look at these people. You need your institution to support this process. If your institution says, sorry, we don't have any money for that, you're like, well, okay, now I'm cutting my knees off. I can't do anything. Right? So there's a lot to be said at the individual level of analysis, that individual leader's abilities, but it's not nearly enough to explain the success of the institution. The institution's got a whole bunch of other variables in it. And something like football, you can break it down. There's an athletic director, and then there's institutional effects. I mean, institutional theory is an interesting thing. How is it that, for example, that University of Alabama keeps attracting such great football players? Because everybody knows University of Alabama is a great football team. So all the great football players try to go there. Well, that's sort of, yeah, but see, it's an open system. It's self-replicating. It's a thing it's built up over time like this. The other thing about, of course, you have a great football team, and that has enormous institutional effects of its own. Everybody knows that university. Everybody thinks it's great because of that football team. So everybody wants to go there. Everybody wants a scholarship to go there. So there's a lot of demand just to go there. Everything feeds on itself. It's amazing. But yeah, so we can't just say a great CEO is a great CEO and that's it. Put a great CEO in a lousy business, and it depends. It may not be a great CEO. Depends on what you're looking for. Subjective measures, of course. What are subjective measures? We use that a lot in our research. What we mean, we give surveys, right? And then subjectively say, oh yeah, strongly agree, strongly disagree, this sort of thing. So we say, well, there's some limitation. I would say that's not a big limitation, though. If the survey is constructed carefully and it's gone through a statistical validation, then you can use that as a measure legitimately for anything having to do with leadership and related concepts. And single point data collection in many studies, that's the snapshot limitation, of course. Let's see, then with recent approaches, and notice we move into systems theory, complex, chaotic systems, prerequisites to understanding these systems, variables that determine system behavior, patterns of interconnections among variables. We've talked about this before, and we'll keep talking about it. Traditional versus complex approaches. The traditional approach is essentially the linear approach. Complex approach is nonlinear. Nonlinear concepts, we have, this is chaos theory right here. Phase, space, multiple behavioral measurements over time, attractors, sensitivity to initial conditions by system stability. More basically, this idea of nonlinearity, we have a really practical representation by saying each input value is added and compounded by the time it becomes part of an output. So you can see this curvy linear progression going, like a geometric progression going up like this. Or maybe it's sigmoid, anyway, it goes up. It's nonlinear. But it isn't nonlinear in the sense of cyclicality. Cyclicality is a different concept. The spinning, buzzing loops of processes, of behaviors, of activities, of events that occur in an organization that keep reinforcing each other, they feed into this nonlinear effect from input to output, but they are themselves not the same thing as that kind of nonlinearity. They are cyclical, but it's not quite the same thing. And we'll touch on that again in the next part of this. Here's, okay, organization change theory. There's elements of theory in here. Notice what we have. We have this little picture over here. Oh, in chaos theory, two nonlinear concepts. Is chaos theory equal to nonlinear concepts, or is nonlinear concepts a part of chaos theory? Chaos theory, complexity theory, systems theory, the nonlinear effect from input to output is common to all of them. When we say nonlinear, we don't mean it's looping all over the place. We just mean it's curvy, and it usually means something like the added value that compounds itself always ends up creating this curvy linear upswing sort of effect. We get it. We just get it big time. Nonlinearity is biggest and most surprising in chaos theory. In any system that's construable as a chaotic system, like a hurricane or a tornado, input to output is just an enormous stretch. And sometimes, in chaos theory in particular, the shape of the outcome is completely unexpected. A little change locally creates this big difference in the outcome. Like you can have a hurricane or not have a hurricane based on a few little things going back and forth. Same thing for a tornado. Where in complexity theory, you can make this argument very easily. The nonlinearity is within, let's say, your manager's control. Within your control as people in management decision making. You know where the nonlinearity is going. It doesn't create weird, surprising effects. So it's a manageable nonlinearity. And systems theory isn't fundamentally different from complexity theory in that sense. So that would be my answer to that question. Let's see. So we have the organization. We have the work setting up here at the top, and it has all these little things that we study. There's organizational arrangements, there's social factors, there's physical setting, technology, vision, they interplay and they do stuff, right? Down here at the bottom we have members. Now this to me is like, if you're trying to say that that is an open system, I'd say, well, it's too robotic looking. It's not spinning and buzzing like it's supposed to. But we're not quite trying to say it here. This is what Dunnett and Huff have come up with, their Handbook of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. So these are the things that we study. There are constructs, there's logic. A construct is essentially, that's our word we use for like a theory. It doesn't literally mean theory, it means it's an explanation of a theory, but we'll throw the word around like, hey, what construct are you studying? Oh, I'm studying TMX in this one. Oh, okay, that's cool. Right? It looks like it means theory, doesn't it? So we use that a lot that way. Think of a construct as being this theoretical phenomenon that causes something or is caused by something. It's a thing that we have in the research. In our minds, it's a clear idea of some kind. LMX is a theoretical construct. Any theory that you find is a theoretical construct. And then we have the logic that interrelates. Whenever you're doing any kind of new theoretical study, you have to show a kind of a wire diagram of what causes what the effect, and this sort of thing. It's a nomological net of some kind. And so the arrows pointing at you is telling you the logic. It's not telling you the full explanation, but it's telling you what causes what's affected by what. You know. And we have ontological model. The ontological model, of course, is the idea, like this thing on the right is, you could argue, an ontological model if you say that that's what in an organization. If you say that's essentially enough to explain an organization, at least from a certain perspective, you say, well, that's an ontological model. Ontological model means it's a model of what's in it. That's pretty much all that means. It's a model of being, you know. And then linkages, cause and effect, why, logic, that's rules of the model, and that's how we work with that. I wouldn't say I could take that particular model and do anything really cool with it. It's a little bit clunky, but you know, there are other models that are like that. You'll notice Burke's model is much better, but it looks a lot like that from a distance. Okay, more recent approaches, then we have Porras and colleagues plan change, deliberate decision to improve your organization. Here's where we have our first order change, second order change. Notice this is the standard distinction. First order change is continuous improvement, or it's evolution, or it's incremental change. All the same thing, all means the same thing. Alterations or modifications of system characteristics. So it sounds a little more complicated than that, I guess. Second order change is revolutionary, disruptive, transformational, and it's systemic change. I would say that it would be hard to draw a line between the two. There's a little fuzzy thing in the middle, but when you see Burke's model later on, you'll notice that it's not quite as difficult as all that. Continuous or first order change and second order change are different, and they belong in different parts of the organization. And then there's unplanned change, of course, that affects things. We always like to try to figure out what's going on there. So if I had to work with unplanned change, so tell me about unplanned change. Well, an organization that exists in terms of what it's doing with respect to the environment, closer to that chaos point, edge of chaos, is going to have more surprising outcomes. You say, whoa, do you know what our employees are doing now? Oh yeah, they're doing this thing. Somebody came up with a skunk works. Can you believe it? Oh really? And so things will emerge in an organizational setting because of the fact that you're enabling a little more radical experimentation or something, and stuff will occur that you don't even expect. You can stop and look at it and study it and say, hey, wait a minute, this could be a good thing. Now, something sort of like that occurs also when you have a big organization and multiple outlets. And again, a little closer to the edge of chaos means there's a lot of freedom with respect to how the various outlets solve a particular kind of problem. And then you have a couple of them coming up with a really good solution. Then you want to learn about it and then spread it around the organization. Very interesting. That's your unexpected change thing. And then we have this model of four streams from Porras and Silvers, I think, yeah. And that's it. It's a change intervention. Okay, we have two kinds of change intervention. We have what they call organization transformation, organization development. This is moving in an interesting direction, by the way. Transformation versus development is what Burke will say, well, transformation, that's where leadership happens. Where Porras and Silvers are writing organization development, they say, well, that's management domain. So you look here on the right under organizational target variables and say, oh yeah, leaders. Anybody in a leadership position, anybody in that outer periphery around the technical core, right? They work on vision. For Porras and Silvers, it's like, yeah, we can all kind of reduce it to it's all vision. I wouldn't argue that way, but it's sort of kind of connected to vision. There are guiding principles. There is purpose. There is mission. There's also where strategy is supposed to happen, by the way. I don't know why it's not in there. It should be in there. But work setting is under organization development. That's what management's responsible for. Organizing arrangements, social factors, technology, and physical setting. You can see the difference. You can see how the vision is, when we say, where does vision come from? Who popularizes vision? The leadership and vision are intimately connected. You never say, well, vision is what management does. You always say, no, vision is what leadership does. So you can see the top half here of each of these two first illustrations is where leadership hangs out, and the bottom one's where management is. And then we have cognitive change, and now we have a bunch of little alpha, beta, and gamma change all running them up, doing their thing. Whatever you want to say, it isn't really lined up. The gamma change would be more associated with the vision level. The alpha and beta down there with the work setting, but you put them in order. So, and that creates change in behavior. Remember, organizations consist of multiple interlocking cycles of events, basically behaviors doing their thing. So we say behavior change doesn't mean just people suddenly act different. It's like the cycles change. Big time or little time, depending on which one you're doing. Alpha change, not much happens. That's different except the metrics. Then organizational outcomes, you have organizational performance and enhanced individual development. Once again, the one on top is the task orientation. The one on the bottom is the person orientation. So you have that normal split there. 3 criteria to perceive a causal link. It's minor but okay. I mean, you're trying to figure out how can you figure out cause effect? You don't want to infer causality when all you notice is correlation. You have to have a couple of bits of information. But this basically has to do with, we see a correlation, and we also have evidence in addition to a correlation, which is snapshot approach. We also notice that when this thing is present, this thing can occur. When this thing is not present, this other thing doesn't occur. So, okay, well, now you have enough causality. There's a before-after thing. It's got to be timing. There's got to be time. That's why whenever we want to do a true causal study, we do an experiment as opposed to, or we do a longitudinal study, either one. But the experiment would be, we had a couple of groups, right? To this group, we started with this thing, and this group, we didn't, Then we did something in the middle. Then something happened, we measured the difference. So we treated 2 groups differently in a way that we could control. So you know whether it's causality or not. And longitudinal is not quite as good, but we tend to do a pretty good job on if it's big enough. This thing happened early. Again, you want a comparison. It happened here, but didn't happen here. Otherwise, the organizations are the same. Over time, this happened, and there's this difference. See, there's your causality. Remember, time is the essential other ingredient in causality. All right, then a couple of things here. We have episodic change. Now, I just want you to touch on this. Levine's model is unfreeze, move, refreeze, or unfreeze, move, freeze. It isn't really refreeze. He didn't say that, but it's a minor difference. Standard model of episodic change. Now, Weick and Quinn, there's Carl Weick. He's a sense-making guy. He's a guy who, it's all about sense-making with him. He decided to change it with freeze to reinforce patterns in day-to-day organizational life. Rebalance, weaken restraints and barriers, and unfreeze, find new ways to effectuate continuous change. Okay, it's a little weird, but he gets us one thing right. I would say he, because I'm blaming it on Weick. He's the one really thinking these thoughts here, although Quinn probably wrote most of that particular study. So Weick understands that weakening restraints and barriers, or basically strengthening or weakening certain factors on one side of the equation, is what changes the metric. He understands that on some level, so that part he gets right. But I wouldn't take the Weick and Quinn model to the bank and say, yeah, that's a better version than Levine. Levine already had it right. It's just that people don't tend to spend enough time understanding him to be able to use it that way. All right, with that said, that takes care of that. Let's take a little break and we'll move into the Beyond the Textbook section. Continuing on then, beyond the textbook. First question is, what aspects of a change intervention occur at the individual level of analysis? It's just a simple academic question. So I answer this way. A change intervention at the individual level of analysis may include any kind of training and development outside the team context. Not that it has to be unrelated to team stuff, like team, are you good at teams, right? The thing is, as long as it's not you're training the whole team, you're training individuals like a bunch of people in a classroom, let's say, then it's individual level of analysis. So in this kind of intervention, the change occurs one person at a time. Examples may include training in teamship, so I threw that in there, just so you know, if you're being trained as an individual, no matter what it is, it still counts as individual level analysis. Or team-oriented skills, if such training occurs outside the team context. It may include executive coaching, because that's one person as well. Most individual level training focuses on building knowledge, skills, or attitudinal competencies. Attitudinal competencies, as opposed to attitudes, skills are essentially habit that turns into something of value. But the term is always used really broadly. People think skills refer to everything that you can do. But strictly speaking, they don't. Typing is a skill, driving a car is a skill. These are skills. They're physical in nature. You get good at them to a point where you forget what you're doing, but you can do it again. You can tie a tie and you forget how to explain it to somebody. So it becomes part of your sort of muscle memory or something. That's a skill. An attitudinal competency, a lot of times we call those skills, but they include, are you good at selling stuff? Are you a good salesperson? Right? Are you good at customer service? Are you good at any kind of interacting with people? Those are attitudinal competencies. Are you good at leadership? That's a high-level attitudinal competency. And there's another level above that, but still, that's what they are. So it's complex. It's tough to teach attitudinal competencies, or tough to train in attitudinal competencies. You usually have to do role-playing of some kind. All right, group level of analysis, then what aspects of team structure may a change intervention address at the appropriate level of analysis? Yeah, well, team structure must be any of the four, basically. That makes sense, yeah, because there are four aspects of team structure. So I say appropriate targets include team norms, team roles, team strategy, and team purpose. That makes sense. Strategy and purpose not difficult inherently if you could say, all right, team, we're going to get there by doing this. But roles and norms might have to be revisited. The norms are probably the most complex because they're fluid and they've developed. A change intervention at the team level of analysis must involve an intact team. The classic example is a T group for improving team communication. You know, they're all in a group. You say, all right, tell me something difficult that happened. Well, you know, one of them says, yeah, the other day, Joe, he did this. You know, I thought he was being weird, so I ignored him. And Joe, what were you thinking? Well, I was thinking this. Oh, really? So there's all these unstated assumptions driving people's behavior until the T group happens and the facilitators dredging this stuff up. They never know what's going on. But then after a T group, you have much stronger team bonding, and they work better together. So I say it's for improving team communication. Team cohesion, in fact, benefits as well. Team-based training may include training in team member exchange, or TMX, as long as such training occurs with an intact team, once again. It may also include team reconfiguration, or the migration from individual to team structures and units. So, yeah. All right, then we get to the more interesting stuff, because that's very basic. We have systems thinking from Bradley. Now, Bradley just sits there and talks to you, just constantly talks to you. But he kind of looks like a guru of some kind. He's got that strange shirt on with a button up here, and then he's got a bald head. But what he says is very, very well thought out. Very well thought out, so I do like it anyway. I'm tempted to fiddle with that video and add some imagery when he says certain things so that he can become more valuable. It's probably what he should have done. Anyway, so what does August Bradley mean by his distinction between linear and circular properties of a system? Because it could be like he's using my terminology, or maybe he's not. Like, well, what do you mean by linear? Bradley refers to the system's cybernetic structure. He doesn't say it, but he's talking about it when he says linear. Bertalanffy would call that the cybernetic structure. He says, he refers to that system's cybernetic structure as consisting of linear movement. He says, well, see, it's linear. Look for the linear stuff. When he says, how do you know? How do you learn about the open system, or how do you learn about the system? How do you apply systems thinking? He says. So, well, look for the inputs and then look for where they go and the outputs. It's like, oh, he's talking about secondary characteristics. But then he doesn't just leave it there. He refers to that as linear in nature, even though technically it's nonlinear. He means linear in the sense of you draw it in an illustration. There's this line going from input straight through output. That's what it sort of feels like. So he says linear. It starts one place, ends up somewhere else. Linear. So I say, even though the correct term is nonlinear, though non-cyclical as well. He refers to process characteristics in terms of circular movement. He says circular, like you said. Hence a reference to cyclicality, which of course is a common characteristic of open systems. And that circular movement constitutes the system's core structure, hence that arrangement of system processes that define the system. So he's referring correctly to the attributes of open systems. Then he mentions fractality, and he mentions all the right stuff, you got to admit. Okay, number 4, first order, second order. He's talking to a group of educators. So they're all about, when they're going through organization change, it's new systems in schools and stuff. How do you compare his first and second order types of change with Burke's concept of alpha, beta, and gamma magnitudes? So, well, first and second order makes a lot more sense. It's easier to work with, but I say most discussions of orders of change use the same model as Dr. Marzano. First order change is incremental, and it's the province of management. Again, I'm drawing from Burke. Burke says that's what management does. Second order change is transformational, hence the province of leadership, again, according to Burke. In contrast, Burke's model of magnitudes of change defines the levels in terms of metrics rather than foundational assumptions. Thus, alpha and beta change are first order levels of change, while gamma change is of the second order. I'd say, well, you want to have a conversation with some of these things. Well, alpha, beta, and gamma is not extremely helpful. But first and second order change makes a lot of sense. And in the end, that's what Burke ends up settling with. He says, well, here's my big giant model. You see, look, management does this and leadership does that. There's only two things, only two big things. Now, why would we not want to get into more of this little nitty-gritty where I say, well, alpha versus beta is a slight difference? Because it's just not necessary. The organizations are big and complex, right? We know they are. It's like leadership is complex. What do you want to divide leadership into? Well, 2 axes. That's it. Let's not try to go any further than that. It's too fluid, too many dynamics going on. If you can say, well, there's this one kind of leadership, there's another one over here, that's probably enough. Same thing for organizations. Say there's a bunch of stuff, a bunch of kinds of change in an organization that is the province of leadership, or the province of the people who are constantly interacting with the outside world, and so they come in like knowing where the organization needs to go because they've just been to the outside world. And there's an aspect of the organization that involves changes essentially within the technical core. You're just changing technical core stuff. That's first order. Nice and simple. No need to get wrapped around the axle. And then we have vision, mission, and purpose. That's Harvey 2015. Harvey is not really talking about organization change. He's talking about individuals, but it's a nice corollary here. So I say, where does the concept of strategy occur in his short presentation on vision, mission, and purpose? He never says strategy. This example is an effective test of critical thinking. Harvey never mentions strategy, but he does address the question of how to navigate one's way toward one's vision. Now apply that to the team level of analysis. Instead of vision, say purpose or something. He says purpose in a different sense, but as you're moving towards this success criterion that you have, remember the vision, what's a vision? It's you in the future. It's your organization in the future. That's all. It's the same bunch of folks, same organization, but later we're going to look like this. But it's easier to construe a vision by saying, we're going there, you're pointing up, way over to the mountain. It's easier to say that. It's completely metaphorical. But your vision is you in the future. That's all it is. And it always means you're going to be different. It just always means that. You never say, vision is in the future, I'm going to be exactly what I am now. Or we're going to be exactly what we are now. It's always different. So vision means you, but you changed. And it's the future because it takes time to change, right? So you sort of have to have a time element in there. Anyway. But Harvey goes into this, how do you get there? What's your set of rules, your principles, your values, the things that are going to get you there? So, okay, now he's talking about strategy, but he calls it mission. So we know. So I say this plan for moving forward is indeed the strategy, but Harvey calls it a mission. As for the true mission, he calls this aspiration the purpose. And he has it a little more mystical, a little question mark at the beginning. So that's your purpose. Well, that's your mission. What do we mean by that? It's just getting us to think a little more carefully about this idea of mission. You're going to be addressing it this week, in fact, in the paper. The mission is true right now. This is what we're doing right now. The strategy is, here's the operating objective that's going to take us from here to our vision. Okay, that's different, really. But the mission is, this is true right now. What do we do? We give people this stuff who need this stuff, and in this way, sort of like that. I have it a little laid out better in my little team write-up. But basically, it's like it's three components to a mission. This is what we produce. This is what we do for people. This thing, we make this product, or we deliver this service or something, whatever it is. This is what we do. And this is for whom we do it. People who need this, people who want that, whatever the whom is. You don't say for everybody, because it's never everybody. It's always a motivation based for whom. And we do it in this particular way. And that particular way is going to be an angle that you chose that has something to do with your core strategy. So your core strategy is somewhat reflected in the mission statement in that sense. But the mission is, we're doing this right now. It is already true. And that's why when we define objectives, I'm not operating objectives, just simple objectives. This year we want to increase this thing here by 10%. Whatever that thing is, it's at least implied in the mission statement, because we're already doing that thing. We just want to do it like 10% more this year. So the mission statement is always what's true now. We will see a little more of that when in the team write-up. So despite these deviations, Harvey's clarification of the connection between goals and vision is invaluable. That's the most important thing he says. To understand what goals are supposed to be a little bit tough. You're not sure you're going to get it. It's got to be a challenge. Objectives are, well, we keep doing things the way we're going, we'll meet them this year. The objectives are always pinned to the mission. Goals are always pinned to a vision. When you meet a goal, you attain a goal, you're that much closer to your vision. And it was a little bit tough if you did it right. If you define it correctly, it's a little bit tough. So make sure the goals are tough. It's called stretch goals. Too often you see people write goals and they're like, that's not a goal, that's an objective. What's wrong with you people? Trying to get that distinction down. Okay, well that is it for our out-of-the-box stuff. Let's move straight into the team project, process definition. There's a lot to it I put in here, but that's okay, it's a paper. Overview. The process defined in this task will remain the focus of team activities through the remainder of the course, so choose it with care. This project task consists of defining the process to improve. That's it, you're defining the process to improve. We're going to call that the focal process. This definition includes confirmation of the client organization and the team member who belongs to that organization, of course. This team member will therefore also serve as a subject matter expert for the team project. Might have been slightly confusing when you were given an expectation in your team charter to specify the SME. I mean, later versions of the course, I'm going to change that a little bit because it might be slightly confusing. The fact is, you may not have known who it was, may not even know until this week who that person is. So, understanding if there's some confusion regarding the SME. But now you know. Caveat on processes. We need to make this distinction because it came up early in the course. I didn't realize it's one of those symptoms. The process to improve is what we're calling our focal process. It differs from the process of improvement, which is a change process. The process obviously is a sequence of events, but it can be either one of those things. It can still be a process. So be careful, as discussions that start with one meaning may bleed into the other meaning. The focal process is part of the client organization's normal functioning. The change process is a one-off effort to alter it, for example, using Cotter's change model. So I say here, even if your focal process should be present, but it's no more than informal in nature, the implicit process is your focal process. The reason I say it is because a lot of times you're like, well, the process we want to improve is, here they're doing this and doing that, and they're missing some stuff they got to do. That stuff they're missing is maybe a process that's missing. And at best, maybe it's being done informally, but nobody's really codified it, nobody's come up with any rules for it. And so you're going to maybe prescribe a process. Maybe that's part of your solution. There's more than one way to do this. Anytime you see there should be a process to do something, it's already being done right now, but it just might be full of errors. Here's an interesting example. Every organization carries out performance appraisal, but not all organizations have formal performance appraisal. But they're all appraising performance. All of them are doing it. You might argue somewhere along the way when you notice an organization's manner of doing it, say, they really need to adopt a formal system here because there's too much fluidity and there's no way to validate it and all this. So problems occur. If you can't formalize your performance appraisal, what kinds of errors might occur? You might appraise people wrong, I guess, right? meaning you reward the wrong people. Well, there's a lot of stuff that can happen. But that's the point, right? See, performance appraisal occurs everywhere, but it's only formal in so many places. A lot of places, nobody ever sits down with you and says, all right, I got your appraisal thing. You might say, well, it's not good to have that formal appraisal. Maybe it's better to have the informal interaction. Okay, fine. That's what I'm saying, right? It exists either way, whether it's informal or not. So if your focal process is currently undergoing a deliberate change of some kind, and a lot of times you'll pick something like that, then apply a formal model in your case study to whatever process of improvement the organization has adopted. Make it make sense or highlight oversights. In other words, you'll be like, okay, well, they're already doing this change here. Let's study that. Okay, fine. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to go to Cotter's model, and you're like, okay, let's see if we can pick out when, where, and how do they do that whole urgency thing? What does that look like? How do they persuade us that it's important to work with them on this change initiative? It's going to get you thinking a lot. You're going to try to apply Cotter's model to it. Sometimes you might say, well, they didn't actually do that. Or you might say, oh, well, it's done in this way, but now that I think about it, I never would have thought of it that way, except, because now we're doing the exercise. Sometimes they'll be missing a step. Sometimes they'll do it in a way that's suboptimal. You find an organization that said they're going to do big old change initiative, and they just gave it to one person who wasn't even very high in the totem pole. And it's all yours. And you're like, the person who's being gifted this dubious honor is like, I need some help. I can't be doing this on my own. That's obviously a big problem. It also violates one of Cotter's basic rules. So you'll see it in there. So it can be fun to do that, and very, very enlightening to do that. So make it make sense or highlight oversights. Okay, now defining the process. The process definition consists of several components as follows. First, we have the organizational profile and mission. Identify the client organization and its industry. Or peer organizations of similar positioning. If you're in the military, industry is not one of those words that makes a lot of sense. But you're identifying your peer organizations. Like I was a member of an artillery battalion, and so if I have a process that I'm investigating, and it occurs at a level of analysis where I would say it's the battalion that's doing it, it's housed within the battalion, not, let's say, within one battery, then I would say, okay, here's this battalion. Its industry is, well, its peer organizations are other artillery battalions, maybe other artillery battalions that are stateside or something like this. You say, okay, that's what, and somewhere along the way there's going to be, what do they all need to be able to do to do well? Well, they need this, that, and this. So they all have something in common. So there is a group, there is always a group of peer entities doing something similar, whether it's the industry or not. And describe what value the focal process contributes to the client organization's mission. That'll take some thought. So I say, well, localize the mission to a meaningful level. In a private organization, the company division, which is the company itself, if no separate divisions exist, expresses the relevant mission statement. Okay, that's fine. In a military organization, the mission resides at the level that houses all aspects of the process. If the mission is implicit, then interpret it based on the following guidelines. And if you're trying to figure out what this mission looks like, you'll be writing it yourself if you haven't actually seen it. And most places don't even write good mission statements. So you see their mission statement, and you want to be like, yeah, we've interpreted it, what they really mean is this, and you interpret it based on the structure here. So mission statements consist of three essential components. First, what does the entity create? That's its value proposition, such as a product or a service. Second, for whom does it create it? But define the for whom in terms of the need, the preference, the motivation that the value proposition satisfies. Don't say for all of, for families, for little kids, for men, for women. Don't say that. Say people or families or whatever who need this, who want this, who are in the market for this. Do it like that. And then C is in what special way the entity delivers it. For example, in terms of core strategy or operating objective, there's going to be some unique approach to delivering this product, service, whatever the value proposition is, that would differ then from some other entity that might otherwise be in the same peer group or industry. That's why I said core strategy. So, well, yeah, what does Walmart do? Well, they set up these really, really big stores, usually right outside the city limits, so that they don't have to pay city taxes. They try to position them so that they can draw people from miles around. So what does Dollar General do? So you see Walmart's positioning, they're cost leaders, so that's part of it, but you see big scale. So that you have Dollar General, they do little stores in a whole bunch of little communities. Walmart could never do that. So same core strategy, cost leadership, but a different approach. So you can see that would be in your mission statement someplace, that approach. Process description then. Describe the process as a sequence of at least 6 value-adding activities. I had to come up with a number because otherwise you get some strange deviations. In a logical chain, from the initial cue, that's the first activity. The initial cue is like, at 5 o'clock, everybody does this. Well, the clock strikes 5, and then the thing starts, in that case. Or customer wanders in and appears to want to place an order. So that kicks off the process. And I say to the process output, that's the last activity. The process definition is a step-by-step activity sequence which presents the same information as one would incorporate into a value stream flow chart. You know, little boxes and triangles and things pointing at each other saying do this, then over here if, then, this or that. You know, that's exactly what we're looking at. It's a value stream flow chart. But you're describing it. Steps may also have contingencies, ancillary inputs, or conditional states. So ensure that your process includes at least 6 steps, including the trigger, that's the cue, and the result, or the outcome, right, the output, plus at least one contingency. You want to have at least one if-then step. It can't be like, well, you do this, then this, then this, then this, and you're done. So no, there's got to be an if-then in there someplace. And in most cases, it'll naturally arise, but I want you to be looking for it. See, that's why I put that in there. So limit your process to 12 steps. Don't go beyond 12. There's got to be a limit somewhere. And that would be including main, supporting, and contingency steps. And you say, well, yeah, but what if the process actually consists of 20 steps or 25 steps? Well, then you're going to ball up a few of them so that you only have 12. See, one of my processes only has 3 steps. Well, you know there's going to be some ancillary conditions and stuff that's going to give you enough extra steps to make at least 6. So that's what you want to do. Okay, so process diagram. Enter your complete step-by-step process description into the diagram GPT routine at eraser.io. I had to pick the AI routine because you can find others that'll map stuff for you, and a lot of them are just really, really lousy, really awful. That's the thing about AI. You can't just say, go find a good AI routine and have it done. I would have to give you all these specifications of what I want the output to look like. But eraser.io does a great job. They already do a perfectly good value stream analysis model. It's perfect. It just, everything's in there. So once you've completed your description of the step-by-step process, then, and by the way, you can have it set up with, step 1, as long as it's complete sentences. I know I say something down here at the bottom. Don't put like numbered things in there, but I mean fragments. So you say first step, project stage, step 1 or stage 1, step 1 of the project of a process. This happens, and then you describe this thing that happened. Step 2, this happened. And you put a little label in there so that the AI will pick up the label and stick it in the right place. But otherwise, complete sentences, and it'll have no problem taking that whole page, be like a page-long bunch of process steps described. You just pour it in there, and it usually do a good job in the first time. But then you really want to take a close look and really parse it. Is this correct? Okay, over here it says that. What do you think? Well, actually, I don't think it does that. We might have misstated. Maybe we should change that part of the wording and then throw it back into the system again and try it again. So yeah, you want to be working with it. All AI needs to be done like that. So if we have a built-out process diagram from work, can we use that? I would like you to take the process description and still stick it in this system here. Now you can include, say, okay, here's what eraser.io gave us, but here's also from what the organization gave us for comparison. You put those both in the appendix so you can look. That just adds more information, but also it can show how accurate eraser.io is interpreting the process, meaning, of course, that if you have defined the process crisply enough, eraser.io will get it right, and it should match pretty closely what the organization has. Otherwise, it'll tell you where to look. Okay, let's see. So enter your step-by-step process. All right, so it's going to produce a value stream flow chart of your process. Place a diagram in the appendix. We don't want any pictures or anything, pictures, tables, or anything in the body. Anything like that, shortcuts to understanding, visuals and stuff, will go in the appendix. And by the way, when you do eraser.io, to my understanding, I looked at it and I was like, okay, I can't seem to download it. Maybe I missed something. So I took a screenshot of it, which is fine. Take a screenshot, stick it in the Paint program, trim it, and now you have a nice image. It's very nice image, a lot of detail. It's not cloudy, it's not scrunched together, it's not simplistic. I've seen some that just give you a linear thing, which is really dumb. It's written very well. So you do a screenshot and you stick it in the appendix, and then in the appendix you're going to want to put in the right figure 1 sort of thing in the right format according to APA style. But review the flowchart closely after generating it to ensure that it matches the focal process as intended. Add corrective comments to the prompt to fix deviation until the result is accurate. It's like, oh, it got that wrong. All right, tell it not to do that. All right, don't do this. Sometimes at the very end you can say step 5 or whatever, but figure out a way to update the prompt. Again, updating prompts and retrying is a normal process in any kind of AI work. You never throw something in AI and whatever it gives you must be right. Always assume there's something a little off from it. Scrutinize it very carefully and find those things and then change the prompt accordingly. So take you 3 or 4 tries and then it should come out pretty close. Then I say signal this appendix item in the process description. So right above this, right, it says process description, and that paragraph that you have, or well, it's going to be several paragraphs because it's like each step. But in the main paragraph, explain, Appendix A shows a flowchart of this process, something like that. So you're signaling in there. You never have anything in the appendix that's not signaled somewhere, so you want to signal it there. Okay, then we have antecedents. Now, separately, without necessarily incorporating this into the process description, you've already done that whole thing. Describe processes, resources, or conditions that directly feed into the focal process. They're upstream antecedents, for example, materials, training, or ancillary processes provided necessary inputs to the focal process. So just be exploring, say, what goes into the process? Well, there's this, there's that, maybe only a couple things. Directly into the process. We're not talking about, in the beginning there was cavemen and they painted, and eventually we got to modern time in our organization. You want to say, no, just whatever's directly before the process. Come up with 1 or 2 things, just to have thought it through, where it's embedded in the organizational structure. Then the outcomes, that's on the other side. Describe follow-on processes into which the focal process directly feeds. Process effects, work in progress, product parts, skill enhancement, preparation, whatever it is. Something's coming out of that process. And in part, you want to be able to do this because otherwise, how can you tell if it's doing a good job or not, unless you know what's coming out of it? They feed into downstream processes. Okay, change goal. Identify what value the focal process adds to the organization's mission at the appropriate level of analysis. That is, individual, group, or organization. It's not, well, okay, it'll be individual if it's an HR thing, right? So there's some of that. But anyway, there it is. Perform a gap analysis by describing the current and desired levels of process effectiveness. Now, a gap analysis literally means that. You say, it's currently doing this, we want it to do this. There's a gap. So I said the added value from the focal process. Now, in my little blurb here, I write, describe how to assess this added value, therefore how you can tell that the process needs improvement. For example, whether via a formal method that's already in place or a prospective method that one may propose. One way to define added value is by describing errors that may occur otherwise it's difficult to do it. Like I don't know what the metric is. They haven't found a metric for this yet. But I can explain what problems occur because the process is not there or something's missing, right? So along with an estimate of the likelihood of such errors, if the process is absent or inert. So approximately 1 out of 5 times, 1 out of 10 times, this thing may happen. It may even be subjective estimate, but you want to figure out some way to be able to tell. Here's what's going on right now. And if we put our minds to it, we could go in and figure out ways to measure the outcome, maybe the error rate or something, even if we don't literally do it in the case because maybe we don't have permission to do it. And then when we fix the process, we'll be able to measure that same stuff again and it'll be better. Lower error or higher effectiveness or something like that. Okay, standards, APA style, 7th edition, with title page, abstract, reference list, and appendix. That's normal APA style all the way through. The length, I decided to give a limited range, 1,000 to 1,200 words, so we're not just going infinitely long or anything like that. It only includes the body, and you need to see the syllabus for length calculation. What we mean is we don't count anything in parentheses, we don't count anything in quotation marks, we don't count headers, We don't count fragments of any kind, kind of mentioned down here. We don't count bulleted items, anything like that. We only count full text, so you want to be careful with that and get it down to the wire. Cite the textbook plus 2 to 4 qualifying sources from the syllabus. I'll get to that in a second. First, the body, that is the sequence of process definition sections between the abstract and references, right? The body is all of these little, it's organizational profile and mission, process description, process diagram, antecedents, outcomes, change goals. That's the body. And it's all, you don't artificially stick page breaks inside the body. It's all one paragraph after another with the proper headers. There's a primary section header which is centered, and there's a secondary one which is left flush. You don't need to go much further than that. All right, so let's see. The body must contain no tables, figures, bullets, numbered lists. I mean, the fragmented kind. I told you when doing your process, you can put step 1, give it a label, the input or whatever the thing is called. This happens. In fact, you may not even think of a label, I suppose. It could be that the system gives you one anyway. But anyway, you just do your best on it. So that would be the only exception if you can argue that. But otherwise, I don't want any fragments in there. I don't want to be like, well, you know what? This process does all these great things, and it's like customer service, strategy, warm fuzzies, all these meaningless, acontextual little blurby things that you listed. That's what we're trying to avoid. There needs to be full, rich explanation. So I say use complete sentences only, aside from headers, which are not complete sentences. Aim for rich description within the length constraint. So it's got to be like, I'm describing this, and when I read it, I should be able to say, oh yeah, I can see this is really from the experience after you shared it with the team members. This is really what is going on here from a human perspective. Now going back up to the qualifying sources, well, what are you looking for? Well, I gave you an interesting article. I think I'll call it up. Where's that thing? There it is. Here's an interesting article. This is Bradford and the gang. And what's cool about it is it's a case study of a certain kind. Skip that part there. They come down here, and here's a lot of interesting process issues that'll occur especially in the accounting context. But you can kind of look through this. Oh yeah, look at all these interesting little process issue labels that can tell us something about what we should be looking for. So there's that. But then more interestingly, I think, more importantly, is further on down, because that should get your mind going. Further on down, we get this list here. Here it is. Example business process modeling cases. There are more out there, but notice how nicely construed each one is. So Borthwick and Schneider, they're always running around trying to do these business process cases. So there's the Borthwick's in there a lot. Here, the first one says context or setting. Kaiten Sushi Restaurant. What's the process that they model? Well, they model food preparation. All right. What was the objective? Business process model and make references about the map. Okay. Yeah. So when you're trying to find a source, or what am I source supposed to say? Well, the textbook's going to say something about processes or leadership or whatever is relevant from the textbook. There's a lot of things you can say depending on what you're studying. But you might want to dig into one of these that's close enough, or maybe this will inspire you to find another source that's closer to the process you're analyzing. Say, well, the process that occurs in this organization at the noted level of analysis is similar to the one reported in so-and-so and such and such. And then so in the so-and-so and such and such, like Bradford and Gerard 2015, let's say you look there and there's a process model. Try to model a process similar to the one you're looking at. It could be it's only sort of similar. It could be that you're a military organization and it has something to do with hardware, and you found a case study out there where somebody modeled the process and it has something to do with hardware. It could be like that. You just get as close as you can, but you want to. This is an approach that you can take to model a process. Don't just arbitrarily say, there's a paper out there that talks about process modeling, it's really cool. So long, let's get on with this. You want to make it related, so you want to have a chance to think it through. So that's what I was talking about there. So just 2 qualifying sources would be enough. Don't go past 4. One thing I know AI does, if you have it try to help you with sourcing, you should be really careful. Half the times it gives you fake stuff. And the other half of the time, it gives you too much stuff. It doesn't make any sense. It sticks it in the wrong places. So it's really awful. So you got to limit it. You got to be really thinking it through. I just reviewed a couple of papers recently, in fact, for a couple of scholarly journals. And in both cases, I'm like, well, this looks good at first, although they sure sourced a lot, a little too much of that. And then I started digging up the sources, like, oh, that one's fake, this one's fake. I was like, oh, these people trying to get a paper published. And both articles are like this. They're very different, but two different sets of authors, but they both are doing the same thing. They clearly took essentially a basic form of the paper, shoved it into an AI program, came out with something a lot richer and a lot more jam-packed full of citations, sources cited in parentheses, and then didn't know what to do with it. Thought, well, that's smart. They did not apply any kind of critical thinking at all, and they tried to turn it into a journal. So in each case, I found all the very specific errors. One of them was there's some statistical errors. AI can't do statistics properly. It's really, really awful. And so I told the editor, no, I advised to reject because they used AI and didn't apply any critical thinking to it. That's how bad it can be. Anyway, one of the symptoms in both cases, one thing they had in common was a whole bunch of in-text citations all over the place, a whole bunch of them. Especially when you get those in parentheses, there's more than one in there. And I say in the syllabus, don't give me more than one in parentheses at a time, only one. AI loves to do more than one. It's one of the symptoms. So I think that pretty much explains it. You'll be able to handle it. So with that said, we'll call it quits and wish you all good luck and see you again online.